Dara Carney-Edelman. Thank you, Richard. I'm your communications coordinator, so I work for YouthMappers, and this morning you are participating in a JOSM and a validation training led by the YouthMappers Validation Hub. And if you're unfamiliar with YouthMappers is a global university network of student-led chapters in 309 universities in 65 countries in the world. And you can use this QR code I have paused on the screen here to learn more about YouthMappers. So just take your phone and you're going to scan it like you would with the picture, and you'll have access to our website and social media accounts. So as you just saw a second ago, this meeting is being recorded and we will post it on our YouTube following the session. And you also should have received emails from me from your Eventbrite account. In those emails, so whatever email you gave me from Eventbrite, I will send you the link to this training once it is uploaded and the slideshow presentation. So if you get disconnected, don't worry, we will share the presentation with you. I just want to thank all of the hub members for being here and all of the data quality that they ensure for the network every week. So, and now I'm going to pass it to the Validation Hub manager, Richard Hinton.
Thanks, Dara. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. If this is your first time coming to one of our trainings, welcome. If you are a repeat attender of our trainings, then welcome back. We're happy you're here. As Dara mentioned, my name is Richard Hinton, and I am the manager of the YouthMappers Validation Hub. Before we get into the rest of it today, I just want to go around and make sure everybody on the hub introduces themselves. So everybody from the Validation Hub is here today. So I'll just sort of call it each of you guys just to sort of say hi and who you are and do a quick introduction. So Joanna, do you want to start?
Hello, everyone. I'm Joanna. I am currently a sophomore at George Washington University in Washington, D.C. in the U.S. And I'm studying environmental science. I do a lot of GIS, and yeah, I work with the Validation Hub currently. I'm going to hand it off to Annaca, who I'm actually in the room with and will be co-presenting with me today.
All right, hi, my name is Annaca. I'm currently a junior at the George Washington University in Washington, D.C., U.S. I am a geography major and a GIS minor. And as Joanna mentioned, we are going to be co-presenting the validation training today. So that'll be exciting.
All right, Maxwell.
Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to see you all here. My name is Maxwell. I'm the research assistant of the YouthMappers Validation Hub. I'm also a graduate student at the George Washington University, focusing on geography, GIS, and geospatial data science. And today we will be answering your questions in the chat. So please do well to ask all your questions, and we are more than happy to answer them.
Excellent. Yang Kun.
Hi, everyone. I'm Yang Kun. I'm a junior at the George Washington University, and I'm the Validation Hub here with all of my other students and colleagues. I will be happy to answer any questions anybody has in the chat as well. I'm double majoring in geography and political science with a minor in GIS.
Excellent. And last but certainly not least, Sarah.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah. I'm a junior at the George Washington University. I study environmental science and GIS, and I'm going to be answering your questions with Maxwell and Yang Kun. So.
I just muted myself. Thank you, everybody. And as you guys have heard, both Annaca and Joanna will be leading the training today. And just to give you an idea of what's going to happen today is we're going to start with a little presentation about validation. And there we'll get some sort of broad strokes on how the validation workflow, how that process actually works when working with JOSM. And so we are operating on the understanding that everybody here knows how to use JOSM. so that JOSM is a tool that we use as for validation. So we're not doing the sort of intro to JOSM stuff today. We're assuming that you guys know some JOSM, but if you do have questions, as Maxwell and Yankun and Sarah said, please just put them in the chat window. We're happy to sort of go over any of those things. As well, during the presentation, which will then be followed by an actual demo in starting the task manager and working in JOSM of validating. There'll be times during the presentation where we will pause to see if anybody would like to take themselves off mute and ask a question. Okay, so you'll have time to sort of articulate your question verbally, and you can also, of course, also put them in the chat window, and we're all here to help answer those questions as they come up. So with that, I think we've exhausted everything I want to say, and we want to get down to business. So at this point, I'm going to mute myself and turn my camera off and hand it over to Joanna and Annaca to start the presentation. We'll chat more in a little bit. Thanks, guys.
Great, thank you. I am going to share my screen now and get us started. Okay, you can see it, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, great. So as you know, we're here talking about OpenStreetMap validations. Again, if you have any questions, you can interrupt me. We will also both be stopping to ask if you have any questions. You can put them in the chat while we're talking, and Maxwell, Yankun, and Sarah will all be on it, ready for your questions. Yeah, we're really excited to be here. So let's get started. So what is validation? Okay. Validation is reviewing the work of previous mappers for accuracy and completion. So projects are going into either Hot Tasking Manager or Teach OSM, and they need to be validated. People are, of course, not sabotaging work or trying to make mistakes, but mistakes do happen. And it's important, like any other scientific field, for other people in that field to review the work and make sure that it is accurate and well done, so that this work can be put back into these projects for real life applications. Validation is done by experienced mappers. So I'm sure everyone here has begun using JOSM already. We'll be working through it in the demo we do after this, but if you haven't downloaded it, it's something that you should really have when being a validator for this process. Again, just making sure that the task is complete and all the features are tagged correctly, especially keeping in mind the project guidelines. A project may just say, we need buildings and roads, and you just need to look at, is every building where it needs to be? Is every road in the line of where it should be? Just being really specific to what the project is asking of the mapper and seeing if that was met. And then, of course, it's important to provide constructive and encouraging feedback to mappers. We want people to keep coming back in mapping. Otherwise, we will be just doing all the mapping on our own. And we do really appreciate people who are just giving their time to do this mapping and helping these projects along. So if a task maybe isn't done to completion or things weren't done exactly correctly, leaving constructive feedback and still being encouraging so that mappers will want to come back. And this presentation will really be focused on the process of validating. There's ways to help it go effectively and efficiently, and just kind of help you know where you should be and what you should be doing. Yeah, that will be kind of where our focus lies today. And of course, in addition to the constructive and encouraging feedback, thanking mappers is really important. Just saying thank you so much for contributing, and then either leaving that feedback or just saying we really appreciate it. Yeah, that's what it is. Okay, let's see. So validating is important just to ensure that all data is complete and correct and well done. Projects really benefit from this open source data entry, and that really helps projects that otherwise would require a lot of funding get through and happen a lot faster. Map data can't be used with confidence until it's validated. It's the way I sort of think about it is like a scientific journal. No data or no experiments can be published if other people haven't looked at it and verified it. And of course, as more projects are being put into the HOT tasking manager or the Teach OSM tasking manager, and more people are mapping, it's still important to ensure that the quality of the data is upheld and that using OSM is still a valuable resource for these organizations putting projects through. So before I get into the workflow, are there any questions yet? Okay, sounds good. It's pretty straightforward. So the workflow, this is kind of the part I was talking about where it's good to know what you're looking for and how to do it in a certain order so that things are just easier for you and you can better validate. So I'll go into each of these in more detail, but just to read what's here. First, read the instructions for the task, align the correct imagery, use the JOSM validation tool, do a visual scan for completeness or major errors. And then if there are major errors or things are not complete, run helpful plugins, then upload your edits, whatever you change to it, and make sure to upload those frequently, and then update the task status and thank everyone, send your messages and whatnot. So reviewing the instructions. This is a super straightforward task that like even I find myself being like, okay, I'm just going to get started without looking at the instructions. But it's really, really important because it'll make your life easier when you're looking at the data in front of you, what you need to be looking for, as well as like, you know, this work is for the project and the organization that is asking mappers to do it. So it's important to fulfill what they are asking of you. And also it can help clarify what types of tags should be used. You know, if a task is saying we need buildings, but we also want to know which buildings are schools or something, it's really important to see like, okay, I have 50 buildings here and 2 schools. Are they tagged correctly? Yeah, and they're also often the instructions maybe help. Sometimes they'll identify what imagery you want to use, or it can help with how to tag certain features. Aligning the imagery correctly. This will be easier to picture when we're doing the demonstration because we'll show you the tool and how to do this, but sometimes the features mapped by users are offset from the imagery. And so instead of moving each individual feature, you can slightly shift the imagery to better fit it. And then the imagery and the features are aligned. Or also it's important to check if the imagery you're using is matching what the user used. So if you're looking at something that's more up to date, but the user used an imagery that had less buildings, making sure you see what they were using and then checking out what the more up-to-date imagery is using as well. And again, this is a bit easier to explain when seeing it live. So I will show that in the demonstration, or Annaca will, whichever one of us is doing that in the moment. Then there's a validation tool in JOSM, which is really awesome and makes the life of a validator much, much easier and just tells you what to look at. So in the vertical toolbar, there's a blue check mark on the right. And again, this will be easy to see when we're demoing it, but it will instantly list all of the features or things going on in the task that maybe don't seem quite right, or something about it brings up an error in the software. Then as those things pop up, you can click and zoom to them and see, is this a problem? How can I fix this problem? It usually gives a little description of like, this is what's causing a red flag for me. And then you can go in and edit that and manipulate it so that that error doesn't come up anymore and things work out a lot nicer. And that'll also help the projects because they won't be encountering these errors either. Sometimes things will be an error or a warning. An error is something that like really shouldn't be happening. A warning is something that the software is just saying, hey, this is kind of odd. Please check this out. And sometimes warnings are warranted, and sometimes you can say, okay, I see what the warning is bringing up, but it's actually okay. And that's kind of an important role as a validator, as like figuring out like what to prioritize and what needs to be done. And yeah, some of these errors can be fixed manually, just moving things with your mouse, or automatically, which there are a lot of cool tools in JOSM that can help expedite a process and do things much quicker than perhaps the human hand could. Yeah, I think so. Okay, so the visual scan and assessment of issues, while the validation tool is really cool, I mean, we can just see when something doesn't seem right, like if a building happens to be missing, like you can see there's a little square in the imagery that needs to be mapped. If things are placed correctly, tagged correctly, buildings should always be squared, in which you can use the Q shortcut, which we'll show in the demonstration as well. I'm sure you're already familiar with this tool, but so making sure buildings are squared, sometimes they need to be rotated. And again, that's something we can show in the demonstration. Roads, are they digitized properly? And you can edit just via like editing the nodes and separating roads and retagging them. If things are incorrectly connected, you can split them. Tags are really important as well. And I think this is an important part to be said here, that when validating, it's really important not to delete the work of others and to try and find a way to make it work in the map. Like maybe there's a building mapped somewhere and you can't, like the imagery isn't showing that there should be a building there. You can find another spot where a building actually is and just move that over there, just to respect the work of others and to uphold the history of what has been going on within a task. And so this is a really helpful graph to see how you should approach a task and when you should do a task yourself or send it back. And I'll just read through it and talk about it. So first question, how urgent is this task? If it is a high priority task and it needs to be finished as soon as possible, it's likely you're going to just need to finish it yourself or fix it yourself and send it through, because it is really important that these tasks get done in a timely manner that these projects are hoping will get done. If it's medium or low priority, you can then ask, when was the square last edited? If it really hasn't been touched for a while, more than a month, you probably will need to fix it yourself because other mappers aren't coming in and fixing it. So no one else is really looking at this data except for you. Less than a month ago, so people are still using it. You can go to the next question. how active is the user being who has been working on this task. If they are really not somebody who seems to map very much, and you can see by looking at their looking at how much they've done on TeachOSM or the hot tasking manager. If they're really not a regular user, they're probably not coming back to this project. Again, it's a fix it yourself situation. But if they seem to be somebody who is an active participant in the OpenStreetMaps network and are working on tasks regularly, you can send it back to them and say, you know, leave one of those encouraging messages like, hi, thank you so much for mapping. I noticed you didn't square your buildings, obviously in a more eloquent way when you're writing it out, but you didn't square your buildings. If you could please return to this project. Again, we appreciate your contribution. And this is kind of just a, when in doubt, turn back to this nice flow chart that was made for us. Because yeah, it can be difficult. I find myself often seeing a task and being ready to just map the whole thing on my own. And I have to remember that's not my job as a validator, unless, of course, it does become a fix it yourself situation, but it doesn't have to be. Yeah, and I think I'm going to turn it over to Annaca now. We're going to split. Okay, I will stop sharing my screen so that she can share hers now.
There was, thank you, Joanna. There was a question here, you know, from the chat, and I think Shibani, if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, if you want to take yourself off mute and just articulate your question about tagging, I believe.
Hi, Richard.
Hey guys.
Okay, my name is Shabani Makawila, and as you see, I posted some questions in the chat below. My question is relying on issue of tagging the feature, and I have one concern. During formation of this tagging system of OSM, I think most of tagging they reliable to the country. I mean, not local country like in Africa. So my question is, sometimes we get difficulty when we try to tag some features here in Tanzania, and it is very challenging. So my question is, it comes in this format, like maybe there is any contribution or any ways of updating this tagging here in Africa, or maybe there is a group which are dealing in updating the tagging system, so as we can have our own tag in Africa and in local country, I mean.
So yeah, you're asking about actually updating the tags that are available within OSM to be more region or area specific, so they better reflect that area. Yes, I think that goes through the OSMF, the OSM Foundation. They have a data working group, which is probably the best people to reach out to on that, because they're the ones that sort of look at the tagging structure. There is, of course, the wiki on how to tag road infrastructure in Africa that a lot of people use that are remote mappers, obviously, to do, and it's all sort of best judgments. But if there are specific tags that you think would be most useful in a particular area, a particular region that you're familiar with, then I would suggest bringing that up with the data working group within the OSM Foundation, and they will they adjudicate all that stuff and take all that information in, and then pass it on to the other parts of the OSM to make this sort of. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. I see also the link you sent about the tagging system in Africa. So I will take a look also. Okay, thank you. I get you, Richard.
All right, awesome. All right, Annaca, you want to take it?
All right. As previously mentioned, I am Annaca. Thank you, Joanna, for getting us off to a wonderful start on our validation presentation. The first thing I'm going to talk about is just common issues and errors that you're going to run into all the time while validating. And just as mentioned beforehand, JOSM is full of little tips and tricks to solve all these errors. So we're just going to go through the most common ones, how you solve them. And like was mentioned in the chat, if you can't remember all these little shortcuts, don't worry. This presentation will be shared with you. And if you go to the JOSM website, they have a plethora of training documents and tips and tricks to help you solve all these issues. So the first issue, and one of the most common for sure, is that your rectangular buildings are not going to be squared. And like Joanna mentioned in a previous slide, this is a real easy fix. You just select the building, hit the Q button, and the nodes will just automatically square themselves and make themselves nice and even and pretty looking for you. Another common issue with buildings is that they'll be tagged as an area and not as an actual building. This is an issue, obviously, because in JOSM areas and buildings are fundamentally different things. An area is typically used for tasks that want to map things such as like land use. So you can like rope off an area of houses and say it's a residential area, or, you know, like an agricultural area if you were doing like a field or something. But actual buildings themselves need to be tagged as buildings and not as areas. And the tag that you want to use for that is just building equals yes. Another common issue is that nodes from buildings will be attached to other buildings or roads. And this isn't just like a building specific issue. Nodes can get stuck together all the time. If you're mapping to objects that are extremely close together, like they'll usually automatically try to connect together. And I do believe there's a way in JOSM to turn off like the automatic clicking of your nodes. But if you do run into that issue where you have nodes that are attaching together that should not be touching, you can just select them, hit G, and it will separate them, and you can kind of fix them to their whatever feature you're trying to map. There's also the issue of areas overlapping with buildings. Like I mentioned previously, let's say you have a section of multiple houses and you want to map that as a residential area. You have to make sure when you're mapping that area, you're going outside of the boundaries of all the buildings. You can't cut through buildings. Don't try to like use the same node that's like the corner of a building as like a node in your like your area mapping. So just try to keep every feature that you're mapping separate as its own separate thing. It'll just not only make the map clearer, more easier to read, but it'll just be easier for you because you'll be doing this work. An issue with roads that's very common is that they're not connected to each other. And this can mean there's either like a physical gap between the nodes, or maybe the line is continuous, but then when you select it, you can see that it's been created in different segments. So to fill like a gap in your roads, you just want to press A, you can click on the end of it and just keep on drawing it and connect it to wherever it needs to be connected to. Or if you notice that there's one big continuous line that's multiple segments, you can just select one, press Shift, select the other. And then when you hit the C tool, it'll combine them all and they'll become one continuous road. Unnamed ways is a super common error that we get, but it's one of those, like Joanna mentioned, it's just a warning, and sometimes you can kind of get away with not fixing it. The only reason I say this is because in unnamed way errors, they're usually looking for the literal name of like a road or a building. And a lot of times if you don't have local knowledge of the area, you won't know this. And we never want to, you know, knowingly mark things incorrectly. So a lot of people will sometimes go in to name the way and they'll just name it like road or highway. That's not the actual name of the road. So if you have an unnamed pathway or road or anything like that, usually, unless you have local knowledge of the area, you can just leave that alone. And then kind of like I mentioned a few minutes ago, you don't want your buildings and roads to overlap. Just make sure everything you map is its own separate feature. And sometimes you'll load into maps and there'll be duplicate features, like someone has mapped the same house or same building like 3 times on top of each other. So there's a super easy script you can use called select duplicate building, which will just automatically select all of those and you can get rid of them in one fell swoop. Or if it's just like one or two scattered about, you can just select it and delete it manually. It's kind of just up to your preference. Okay, this is just a continuation of some of our common errors that we see. Like I mentioned earlier, sometimes people will mistakenly name roads road or highway because they're trying to fix that unnamed way error that we get. And then if you see this happening, you know, over and over again in your roads, you can just use this Control F command and then type in, you know, whatever highway, like whatever feature, whatever name you're looking for, and it'll automatically bring all of them up for you. So you can just kind of fix them all in one fell swoop and not have to, you know, check every feature as you go through your regular validation process. Like I said earlier, there will be a lot of instances where nodes on one feature will be connected to something else, like roads and buildings. So you can just select those and hit G and it'll unglue it for you. And then oftentimes after you've unglued a node, you're gonna need to resquare your building because it'll be a little off kilter. And then you can use the JOSM search tool to review edits, to search terms and features. If you know you don't want to look through the map for them manually, this is also super helpful if you want to pull up multiple features that share an association at one time. Yeah, and then to access the search in JOSM, you just press Control F, click the magnifying glass icon on the top, or you can hit edit and search, and hopefully that'll become a little more clear to you when we do our demo and you can actually see our screens. Okay, now we're going to talk about what is complete mapping, because when you're either mapping a task regularly or validating a task, you always want to make sure that you're completing it to the best of your ability, and you know, making sure all the features that need to be visualized in that map are being visualized. So the most important things when it comes to mapping things completely is making sure you're mapping everything the instructions are looking for. Instructions will often specify like, oh, this task is specifically to map for roads and buildings, or this task is specifically to map for land use. And so you'll know going in what you need, what needs to be visible on the map when you're finished. Additionally, make sure you're tagging your features correctly. So you're tagging buildings as buildings, you're tagging highways as highways. If there's a road that very obviously is not a highway and it's like a little footpath, you can tag it as a path instead. And things like that. Again, if you have an unnamed way, you can't always fix those issues, but if you do have local knowledge, go ahead and let us know what the names of the roads are. So yeah, obviously, if you come across any major errors, you can just go ahead and fix them, especially if this is a high priority task. There are any little minor items missing, like maybe everything is mapped except for one or two buildings, you know, just go ahead and pop those buildings in, tag them, run the validation tool again, and you should be good to go. And yeah, if you find that you're continuously seeing tasks that don't seem to be mapped all the way, you know, just go back and check the instructions, make sure that you're looking for the correct things. If you notice that things are missing that are mentioned in the instructions, go back and try to catch all of them. And then another incredibly important part of the validation process, one that you would think would be obvious, but a lot of times you'll get into a map and features will be like off from the imagery. Just make sure that everything is aligned correctly on top of the imagery as you see it. Like Joanna mentioned earlier, there is that offset tool. So if, you know, multiple features seem to be off from the imagery, you can just kind of move all of them in one fell swoop. And do your best not to delete the work of others. People work really hard to validate our tasks and contribute to them. So it's always best to keep as much of the work as you can. Okay, and then validating your task. So like Joanna mentioned initially, you're gonna choose your task, you're gonna go in, you're gonna hit the validation tool, it's gonna bring up all your warnings and errors. Then as you fix these warnings and errors, continue running the validation tool over and over as you fix them, not only so it, you know, keeps updating and telling you, hopefully, you know, that your errors are getting less and less, but maybe you accidentally do something that causes a problem elsewhere. You don't want to upload it with that, that issue still existing. So just make sure to continuously run the validation tool so you know that there's no issues before you start to upload your data into JOSM. And then always leave a brief comment of the changes that you've done and the imagery that you used. We always use the little hashtag, YM Hub for YouthMappers Hub after all of our edits. And also this is just helpful to anyone that may look at the map after you, so they know what imagery you used, they know exactly what changes you provided. And then after you have successfully uploaded all of your changes, you can return to the tasking manager and validate a different task. All right. Oop, I did not mean to hit that slide. So sometimes you will come across a task that you open it up and you see it is just filled with issues. So, like mentioned before, if there's a task that's filled with issues, it's not really high priority, it's being mapped by an active mapper. Don't feel like you have to be responsible for finishing the task, from scratch pretty much. It's completely fine to knock it back and say, hey, this isn't mapped appropriately, so it doesn't need to be validated yet. Can you please fix this? And then when you do that, you're gonna, when you notice that that needs to be done, you're gonna go ahead and upload any edits you've made so that work doesn't get lost. Return to the tasking manager and say, no, this task is not well mapped. Tag the mappers that were working on it, and just leave a comment that's kind of along the lines of like, hey, thank you so much for contributing to this task. I've just noticed that, X, Y, and Z haven't been finished yet. Would you mind coming back to this task and helping us finish it up? And you can tag the mappers by looking under the history tab of any task. It'll have all of their usernames lined up. And you can just, type them right in and get a message directly to them. And usually people are very willing to come back and help map, especially people that are active on the site. So don't feel like you're, being rude or anything by asking them to come back and map some features for you. And then another extremely important part is after you finish validating, always make sure to thank the people that have been working on it. Like I said, people work really hard. They dedicate their free time to helping us map these tasks. So always just send, a nice little message like, hey, thank you so much for helping. And it just encourages people to, come back and map again. It shows them that their work that they're doing is actually going somewhere. People are actually seeing it. People are actually using it. So it does make a difference. I remember when I first started mapping, like I used to get so excited when I got the little like, your task has been validated message, it used to make my day. So always remember to leave a nice little message, even if there's no issues, like nothing to update them on or ask them to improve, just always send a little thank you. And then these are just some message examples that JOSM gives us. So like, hi, username, thank you for mapping. Or maybe if you're suggesting, them to make a correction, you could say, hi, thank you for mapping. This is just a reminder to square your buildings using the Q key. And so, it's thanking them, but at the same time, it's also reinforcing a skill that they should keep, a skill that they should learn. The YouthMappers motto, we don't just make maps, we make mappers. So other than, just having a well mapped feature, we also want to make sure that the people that are helping us contribute to these tasks are honing their skills as well. And then there are quite a few plugins that you can use with JOSM that are just going to make your life so much easier. So when you're in the JOSM program, there will be a little tab for you to hit preferences, plugins, and search. And you can search up a bunch of these. Oh, I'm sorry. Does someone have a question? Oh, okay. So like I said, there's a bunch of plugins that you can use. And I believe the JOSM website has a lot of these plugins listed and will tell you exactly what they do if you want to go check it out. But you can just use the plugin search tool, search up whatever you want and download it right into JOSM. I know one of the plugins that we use regularly is the building plugin. allows you to make buildings really nice and rectangular and easy. There's also the Mapathonner plugin that is a very common one. And then scripting will allow you to do things like I mentioned earlier, like if you want to select a bunch of duplicate buildings, if you need to select a bunch of features at once, then scripting will allow you to do that by typing in whatever you need to search up. Okay, and then like I mentioned before, there's a ton of resources that kind of repeat all the information that we've been giving you. So if you miss out on something, or you're like, there's no way I'm going to be able to remember all these keyboard shortcuts, they are definitely in one of these resources for you already. There's the JOSM training and validation guides, the YouthMappers training document, and all the recorded sessions like this will be available to you as well. And then just at the very bottom here is mine and Joanna's contact information if you have any questions about what we've presented on today. And then our hub manager, Richard Hinton's email is down there, as well as our team member Maxwell's email. So if you're looking through these training documents, you still have questions, do not worry. I guarantee one of the four of us will be more than happy to help you out. And now we'll probably take a moment, pause, make sure nobody has any questions, and then Joanna is going to get us started with doing a little demo for you.
Are there any questions for the trainers at this time before we get into the live demo? Doesn't look like it. So at this time anyway. So Joanna, you want to get started with the actual validation process in real time? And as usual, if anybody has questions, please just throw them into the chat and we'll sort of address them. Or you can sort of put your hand up on the screen and we'll sort of be looking through those and make sure they'll address any questions you guys have.
Okay, I will reshare my screen. Yes, I will just do my desktop. So I wanted to put this up again just to, talk through while I'm validating. But I've chosen a task. This is project 1177, and I've chosen a task here to work on. So I'm going to hit validate selected task. And I've got my JOSM application already open, so it will open it up in here. While I wait for that, I'm going to look at the instructions. So in this task, it will be to trace buildings as areas and tag as buildings, and to square all the buildings. Okay. Please map local streets and roads and follow the tagging convention based on the link that I put in the chat earlier. And I'll be referencing that. I have it open here to look at when I'm going through my demonstration. So here is a task. Looks like there's some stuff going on. I'm going to open my imagery. This is just a me thing. It's not an everyone thing. I just usually start with Bing and see kind of what's going on. And then I happen to know that in this area, Maxar has been more up to date with things, but it looks like Bing might be a little bit better in this case. So I may stick with Bing actually. And this is like part of the validation process, is figuring out what imagery is going to suit the project best and what, going through. I've looked at this project a little bit already, so I won't go through all of them and compare, but I do sometimes go through all of them and just see which one looks like it's going to be the best for this task. So right away, I can see that some of these buildings aren't squared. And actually, it was brought up to me in the chat that sometimes a building isn't supposed to be a square. Like they're circular buildings. It looks like there's some circular buildings in this community. So I will show how to work on that as well. But so I have my imagery. It appears to be aligned. If it could be aligned differently. So if I were to want to change that, since I'm using Bing, I would click on Bing here with this tool with the two little arrows, and then drag it over. I'll just look at this building, drag it so that this building is aligned. And now that it seems aligned and I'll have to go through and edit the other buildings, which I'm okay with, I can press OK. And now next to my Bing imagery part here in my labs, I can see that I've manipulated the alignment. And if I need to, I can always come back and edit it again if it turns out that that was the wrong move for me. So here, I will make sure I'm sticking to our thing. So I've aligned the imagery. Now I will go to my validation tool, which is here in the bottom right corner. Looks like I have two warnings, unnamed ways, seemed a problem. I do not know the name of this road, and so that's something that I am not going to fix or deal with, because by me entering that the road is unknown or unclassified or something, that's actually me saying that that's the name of the road, which no roads are named unknown or unclassified or something like that. So that's just entering data incorrectly. When you, at least when I first started validating, I thought that that was what I was supposed to do, but that's assigning a name that doesn't actually exist. And then it looks like I've got another problem. I'm gonna right click, zoom to that problem. And here is a node of a road ending near another road, which that's just bringing up a error in the system, because that doesn't really happen a lot. Like, that doesn't really make sense when we think about the world around us. Like, normally roads are going to connect if they're near one another. And I can see that they do connect. So I'm going to click on this node and hit shift. And while I'm holding it down, click on this one, or actually I'm going to drag this a little closer first. And then I'll click on it, hit shift, holding it down, clicking this one. And then I'm going to hit M. And now those two are connected, and that warning has gone away over here. And I'll just rerun my validation. And the only warning I still have is that I don't have the name of a road, which I'm okay with. I'm gonna keep on going through my workflow because there's nothing I can do about that right now. So also, one thing I like to note is that using a mouse is really helpful. I'm working from a laptop, but I have a mouse to work with as well. You can just do things a lot easier. I've tried to use my laptop mouse pad and it did not work well for me. So yeah, having a mouse is a very helpful tool when using JOSM in any validating or just mapping. So I ran my validation tool. Now I'm going to scan for completeness or major errors. So again, like I had seen earlier, it looks like some of these buildings aren't square. So I am going to go to the Mapathoner tool, which in our previous presentation, we talked about downloading that plugin. And I'm going to go to select non-orthogonal buildings. Click on that, and immediately it's telling me all these buildings need to be squared. And instead of going through each one individually, which sometimes I may need to do, but it looks like in this case, this is holding up pretty well and seems to be exactly what needs to be done. I am going to hit the Q button, and all at once, all of these buildings have been squared. And if I unclick and go to the Mapathoner tool again and select, it's not going to say anything anymore because now all of my buildings are square. So before I even get into the placement of other buildings, I do want to address what I was saying earlier and what had been brought up to me about non-square buildings. So if I click on B, oh, wait, B, okay, now I'm in my building tool, which if I make a building, there's a building. I'm gonna undo that. I can also do Alt B and go over these circular buildings and just do the diameter and click, and it'll make a circle around those. So sometimes there are not square buildings, but oftentimes when we're dealing with rectangular buildings, we're going to need them to be squared. And if anyone wants to ask me about that further, I'm more than willing to talk about it and, see if what I'm saying is completely making sense or if you disagree with it. To get back to the square building, you do Alt R. Oh wait, no. Oops. The Alt R. And now I'm back in my square buildings. So looking at this visually, I can move these buildings to where they need to be. And since this is kind of smaller tasks, and thinking about that workflow, if I should be the one to edit this or if I should send it back, this is pretty small stuff. It's not going to take up much of my time, and can be edited fairly easily. So at least in my opinion, this is something that I would do on my own instead of sending it back to the user. Yeah, so then I would just move these, and once all of those buildings were mapped and I had gotten all of these circular buildings, I would look at the tags of the roads, and also the placement. It looks like the alignment of these roads is a bit off, and so I would likely change where this intersection point is. And that's kind of, again, just placement stuff. And it looks like there's like 2 roads mapped right here. So I would potentially find a different place I would potentially split this roadway and move it so that this error wasn't happening, or I could, well, I wouldn't want to just glue the nodes together. So I guess this is real time looking at problem solving for a validator, figuring out you don't want these 2 roads to be existing in the same place. But by just merging them together, that's just merging 2 separate features and placing them in the same place. Oh, it looks like this was produced by Hinton. Cool.
I wouldn't trust him. I don't know.
So problem solving in that scenario, and looking at, this is tagged as an unclassified highway. So if I were to go to this resource that I sent, which I'm having trouble clicking on because the zoom bar is there, we can look at what an unclassified highway tag means. So a minor unclassified road, roads that allow travel and commerce from paths and residential roads to and between settlements. So that seems to be the case here. It's a pretty small road. And even though I won't ever map outside of my task, you can kind of see what's going on. There's some other settlements to the side that this is going towards. So I think an unclassified tag is probably a safe way to tag it. But if you're unsure, you can always read through residential roads, and kind of the most important roads are up here. Big roads, lots of cars driving through are going to be these roads. But that doesn't seem to be the case in the task at hand. Yeah, and so in my work and what I do, I would go through all of this, tag it, move these buildings, make sure that the roads are accurately placed. And then once that is complete. I mean, even before I'm certain that this is completely done, I should upload my changes. I am getting another warning, so I should go back now. Got unconnected nodes without physical tags. Zoom to problem. Okay, so I think those might have been ones that I just made on accident. So I will just select those, and normally I wouldn't delete them, but I think this was me just now, so it's okay. But in a normal case, I might try and find a place where I could maybe create a building or something and queue that, and then add a tag, building, yes. If I were to want to incorporate somebody else's work in. But again, this is my own doing just through this demonstration, so I'm perfectly fine deleting it right now. And so I'll go to the upload again, see if I receive any more errors. It looks like I have not. I'll do a quick edits to roads and buildings. And I work for the YouthMappers Hub, so hashtag YM Hub. And I will upload those changes. And it looks like that was successfully done. So then I would go here. And because the project is not completely validated, I will just say stop validation. Or if I wanted to send this back to the mapper directly, I would say no and comment and say hello at mapper, and like their username would come up, and just say something along the lines of thank you for contributing to this project. Oops, I spelled contributing wrong. Remember to square your buildings before marking the task as complete. And then another little line about we really appreciate your work, just so they know, even though I'm asking you to put more work into this project, I still really appreciate what you've already contributed. But I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to submit it and say that comment. I'm just going to stop validating. Yeah, and Annaca can show us another task. And yeah, if there's any questions before Annaca gets started. Wait, let me stop my share. Yeah. Oh, looks like there's a question. If you want to unmute.
Okay, Joanna. Thank you for nice presentation, and I have a little question here. That after you doing validation, now you are going to specify in a task manager that how could you know that a given person is doing a mapping of features, and you are going to maybe to tag him, or you are going to point that thank you, maybe hello, maybe somebody for doing this and this. But as we know that in one task, we believe that there is more than one mapper who can contribute to do a mapping to a given task. So how could you know that the one you point is the one who is responsible for fixing a given features? How could you know?
Yeah. Well, Annaca has her screen open right now, which kind of helps if you want to go back to that history.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So in here, you can look at the history of who's been mapping, and looks like me and Annaca have done some work on this one task in particular, but I see like there's another mapper who's not me, who's not another validator. So just looking for people who have been working on these tasks. Sometimes when there are multiple people working on a task, I will just try and see who's been doing the most work, and thank them there. If any of my colleagues have any opinions about that, I tend to just find a name and thank them individually, and not try and thank every single person who may have done just a few edits, but somebody who, you know, put a lot of work into a project. When Annaca opens her validation, there's a way to see the author of, and like author being the mapper of each feature. And so I'll kind of click through those and see whose name is popping up a lot. Yeah, and she can show you that in a moment when she opens hers now that it's on her screen. But yeah, that's kind of my advice. I don't know if there's a exact science to it. Yeah.
There's no exact science, but you're right. Using the pardon me, the author window in JOSM, as you select features, you can sort of see who's been working through there, and then use it to history. When you go to the task manager, looking at the history tab there, you can get an idea of who's working on those particular tasks. So typically it's a combination, because you do want to identify obviously who was doing the majority of the mapping, or if you notice a number of buildings that are not, say, front of their corner squared or positionally inaccurate, as you select each one of those in JOSM, you can sort of see who the author is. If you see the same authors coming up, then make sure you tag that person when you're reading your comment, just as a kind of reminder, and reinforce sort of good practices within the OSM community. It sometimes takes a little bit of practice going sort of back and forth, but yeah, there's no exact science, but just doing your best and you do your due diligence to sort of fix things and identify the appropriate users.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Joanna and Richard. And what I noticed that I believe that both are a good way. For example, you talk about to check on the history, the last one who submitted the task, but also we can go to the JOSM and check on who updated the features, and we can comment according to the feature he modifying. Yeah, so thank you guys, and appreciating it.
Absolutely, good question. Good question.
Alrighty, so I am just gonna really quickly go through another task with you, just so you can kind of like put your eyes on two different ones. This one maybe will have problems come up that we didn't see in the other one. So it'll just, you know, you'll just be able to see two different examples, and I think that'll be helpful. So yeah, the first thing I did, just as Joanna said, is I went in and I selected the task that I was going to do, which is, I cannot see the number because of my Zoom. 1177.
Yeah, same
yes,
one.
on Teach OSM. So the first thing you do, you come in, you select your task, you decide which square you're going to validate, and open it up in JOSM. And then, just as Joanna did, we're just going to really quickly read through the instructions, see what they're looking for. So they're looking for buildings, we're looking for roads, and for areas. So those are the three main things that we're going to see while mapping this task, and that's what we should keep our eye out for. So after you select the task, it's just going to open up in JOSM. And the imagery that I am currently using is the Bing aerial imagery. Just as Joanna did, I usually come in and I will look at Bing, I'll look at Maxar, I'll look at a couple of them, just to see which one is going to look the best with the features that are on the map already. And in my opinion, Bing is what is going to look the best with this task.
It's still on your.
Oh, I'm so sorry, guys. It's like, should I just
Try stop share and then try again with desktop, because then you can switch between just screen probably.
Okay, sorry. I didn't realize you guys couldn't see my screen in JOSM. That's my bad. But here we are in our task. Like I said, I am using Bing Imagery because I've looked at a couple different ones and I've determined that Bing is what's going to look the most accurate with the features that we have mapped.
I got a question during mine that I didn't see, that somebody would like to see an overlap with the Maxar imagery again to check like the aligned shiftment. So just showing like how the shifting the alignment can shift between different imageries.
Let me wait for my little zoom bar to go away. Okay. Then here we have our Maxar imagery. I was like, you could see kind of the immediate change it had between Maxar and Bing. If you're talking about like imagery offset, as we can see here, it's not really too bad in this task, but I'll do it just a little bit just to show you guys an example. You can see how these marked features are kind of above where the actual roads are. So if you wanted them to be like more in the center, you could hit imagery offset, and then it will give you the choice of which layer of imagery you want to offset. So make sure that you are offsetting the layer of imagery that you want to use to check your features. So in that instance, I'm just going to use Maxar. And then like Joanna showed us, you can just kind of click wherever you want on the map, and you can drag. And you see as I drag, like the little numbers in the offset will change. And you can just kind of place the map wherever you want underneath the features to get what you think is going to be the most accurate depiction. And then you can just exit out of that and it will be offset. And yeah.
I hope that answers the question. If not, please feel free to ask again. We have no problem revisiting.
Okay, but like I said, for this task, I am going to be using Bing. So I'm just going to get rid of my Maxar imagery. All right, so we've selected our task. We've read through the instructions. We've picked the correct imagery. Now, the first thing that we want to do is run the validation tool, which just wanted to run it a couple times, make sure it got everything. A lot of times, if you've like selected a feature like this and you run the validation tool, it will only check that feature. So make sure you have nothing selected when you run it initially, so it'll show you all the issues that pop up. And with this task, surprisingly, we only have one little warning, and it's that a building is crossing a residential area. So we can see right in here, this area goes right through this building here, which we do not want. Usually with things like this, I always just kind of scoot it over a little bit and make sure there's something actually there. And then this is just a really easy fix. Since there's not really a lot of other buildings in this area that we have to worry about, I would probably just go about this by just pulling the nodes out a little bit and making sure that our building is not intersecting this line right here. So now that we've done that, let's just validate again. And you can see that we've resolved the issue. So the little validation error has gone away. Now that we have no notable issues that are popping up, I just like to go through. I'm usually like a top to bottom type of person. So I just will start at the top of my task. I'll just go through and make sure that every feature that is mapped actually corresponds to a feature in the imagery. In a lot of our tasks lately, we've been having issues where features are mapped that don't show up on the imagery. So to avoid that, I just kind of like move things over, make sure that a building or a hut is actually placed on top of what looks like a building or a hut in the imagery. And I'll just go down these paths and make sure they're actually all over notable paths that we can see. And then, as you're going through, you might just want to do like little tweaking things like that just to make the pathways more accurate. When you get down here into your square buildings, make sure those are all squared with the Q button. Another helpful little shortcut, if you have a lot of circular buttons, circular buildings, not buttons, and you notice they're not actually perfectly circular, you can hit the O key on your keyboard and it'll make them a nice perfect circle for you, kind of like the Q key equivalent for a circular building. So yeah, I just go through and do all of that, make sure all my features look nice and neat and they're over top of where they need to be. Just like Joanna mentioned in her validation, you can always come in and just check the tag of whatever feature you're selecting. So we can see that these are unclassified highways. And from the resource that Joanna pulled up earlier, I do think that unclassified would be an accurate portrayal of these roads. So yeah, I just go through my task. I make sure all my imagery, all my features line up with my imagery. We're actually mapping things that are there. And once you've done that, I always hit the validation tool one last time before I upload my edits. We have no issues coming up. So then I'm going to go to upload data. And we'll just put in here, you know, like moved buildings out of intersection, I guess, out of the area intersection. And then we'll put our little tags. I always throw in a little hashtag let girls map into mine. That's just me though. And then you just hit upload changes and it'll upload them right into OSM. And there you go, you're completed and you can select another task. This one did look to be well mapped and there's no other validation issues. So I'm going to say yes, that this task is well mapped. Check the history and see who last worked on it. Only one mapper worked on this task, so we only have to worry about giving credit to one person. So I'll just leave my little comment and I'll say, thank you at Summer Wilson. And like Joanna said, once you start typing it, it'll just automatically pop up. Super, super useful tool for me personally. For your help mapping this task. And then we'll just hit submit. All right, and then, you know, you can choose another one and do the whole process all over again. Right, and that is pretty much it for mine and Joanna's demo. So I guess I'm going to hand it back over to Professor Hinton, and he will wrap us up.
All right, so thank you very much, Annaca and Joanna. Great job. I did notice the one question about imagery in the chat, and Maxwell, you answered that. But just to bring that up again, I believe the question was choosing the correct imagery to use. And depending on the person who created the project itself should identify the best imagery. Best practices is that the person creating the actual project will have investigated the various imageries available for their study area and will identify which imagery to use for that project. So when that's done, then use that imagery as best you can. But as Maxwell noted in the chat, it's good to check against other imageries as well, just in case certain areas are maybe a little more updated. And it's good just to give us a second sort of viewpoint on the same study area. But typically, the project should have a imagery identified as to which one's the best one to use. If there is no imagery identified, then it's really up to you to determine which one seems to fit best and identifies the features most clearly. If there's any ambiguity or there's a lot of confusion, then you can actually, in the tasking manager, write a comment and tag the project manager about your issue, and then the project manager will actually get an email about that as well. Right, so multiple ways sort of to get at this, but identifying the imagery that's preferred for the project is the first thing, and then compare it to other imageries that are available is sort of step 2. And then obviously we want to use the best imagery available. And then, as we saw earlier, when you first look at the imagery, the chosen imagery, you want to make sure that the bulk of the features align with the imagery, right? So if we're using Bing or if we're using Maxwell, whichever one this has been identified as best, make sure those features match the imagery. And if not, then we need to do the adjustment. All right, so I generally look at a lot of the road intersections and some of the buildings that currently exist and sort of get a best fit, and then match everything else to that. If I have to adjust the imagery at all, then I'll sort of move from there. But that's always a big question when people are getting to even tracing, let alone validation. What imagery do I use? With the validation, we do want to honor the project goals and the project, how the project set up as closely as we can. So if they're saying mapping buildings and this project is to map buildings and map roads using Bing imagery, when we do the validation, or when you do validation, you should use Bing imagery whenever you can, and then make sure you're validating the buildings and the roads. Okay, for that project, all the tasks, they're considered validated if all the buildings and all the roads, in this example, have been traced and are done so accurately and tagged accurately. If you see other issues as you move through a particular task, it's always sort of incumbent on the user and any member of the OSM community to fix things that you see that are wrong while you're sort of mapping through your task. But for validation purposes, if you're working on a particular project, your focus is for what the project is asking for to actually validate that particular task. So again, if say a project is only asking for buildings, that's all they're asking for. If I want to validate a particular task, my job is to make sure all the buildings are done as accurately as possible. Maybe the roads are a bit of a mess. That's not fine, but for the validation purposes, I can still mark that particular task as valid, or it has been validated, even if the roads are a mess, because it's only asking for buildings. So from a building standpoint, it's perfect. Now, if I see roads are a mess when I'm validating, and if I'm only validating buildings at that time, I will still fix the roads as I see them, just to make the entire data set healthier. But we need to take the lead when it comes to validation. We need to take the lead from the actual project instructions themselves. So whatever the project manager wants for that project, that's where the tracing needs to happen, and that's where the validation on those tracing work needs to happen. That was a long rambling answer. Are there any other questions at this time? We still have some. We have 7 minutes left. It looks like for any conversations that may want to happen or questions people want to have answered. I know it's getting kind of late for some people around the world. So I'm not going to keep you any later than 11 our time, which is in about 7 minutes. So please feel free if you have any questions for me, or if any of the other hub members want to chime in with any other comments, please do so. I will say that this training is part of a series that we try to do every season. We'll do in our spring and our summer and our fall, we try to host a JOSM training, then a month later a validation training. So if you want to come back to another training that we do, by all means, you're welcome to do so. Our plan is to this summer offer a JOSM training probably in a couple of months, and then latter part of the summer offer a validation training again. And as was mentioned earlier, this recording will be available on our YouTube channel very, very soon. And the documentation, rather the presentation slides will also be available from here. And then if you go to the YouthMappers website and under the projects, you see the validators link. It's you'll find a bunch of resources there, a documentation on how to use JOSM, or documentation on validation, as well as we showed earlier in the presentation, those sort of what I like to call little love letters when you're tagging somebody and thanking them for their mapping. We have a whole bunch of examples of that you guys can use as well. So we do have a lot of sort of resources on our website, and for you guys to use, and that documentation is all there for you guys to use and have fun and enjoy. I see there's a hand up here now. So is it Frank? I'm gonna go ahead and take yourself off mute. You can ask your question. No, I'm not sure if you're
Frank, we're not hearing your audio right now. If you're not able to unmute, also feel free to just put your question in the chat. Or maybe that was accidental. All good.
That could happen too. That's perfectly fine. Any other questions or comments from anybody? Anything? No? All right then. Well, thank you much, everybody, for attending today. Thank you, Joanna and Annaca, for leading us through the training today. Thank you to everybody for showing up. I know it's can be awkward times and it's hard doing an international call like this because it's so in different time zones, but please look out for our future trainings and you're always welcome to come back, ask more questions. And we'd love to see you guys sort of start validating and working through this validation process. And if you have any questions in the future, once you've sort of looked over maybe this presentation and the resources we have online, if you have any questions, please just email us. We're happy to answer any questions and walk you through things as best we can. Okay. So thank you very much for your attention, ladies and gentlemen. And with that, I'll leave you to your days to continue on and have a great one. And we'll see you guys next time, hopefully. You guys.